where we should be focused is on the cities of the future. And as you just saw in that video, it's not enough just to talk about cities as little black dots. There's something far larger than that. We are in an age of megacities. Can we pull up the map, please? This is going to be a map of the real urban world. We have multiple versions of it here. This is a demographic heat map. The entire world's population is seen here, distributed by population density, yellow, orange, pink, the most dense areas. So you can see that our civilization has become very urbanized. As you know, you've seen the statistics, 50%, soon 60%, and rising of the world's population living in cities. First and foremost here, though, you see these highlighted ovals, the megacity clusters. In the video, they mentioned the Beijing-Tianjin corridor, population rising towards 100 million people. There are other such megacity clusters. Many of us grew up hearing about Tokyo as the world's largest city, and now two of the world's largest cities are these Chinese clusters, including, of course, the Pearl River Delta region, which is now called the Greater Bay region, where, as you must have seen in the news a couple of weeks ago, a new bridge has opened linking Hong Kong to Zhuhai to Macau. So infrastructure, urbanization, demographic flows, all of those creating this world of super cities. And we have a phenomenal panel with, unfortunately, not a lot of time to get through how we move from a world of just mega cities that are large built-up areas into super cities, high-performing cities. So, Heng, Chee, I'd like to begin with you to talk about this challenge, because Asia not only has the largest share of the world's population, the largest cities, it has megacities of that sort of, just emerging market variety that are just, large slums, still very underdeveloped. But it also has some of the leading high performers. So how would you segment this? And for you, which are the super cities that are the role models that have done the best, and what can we learn from them?
Well, megacities have been with us for decades now. And when I think of megacities, they are cities where you have population rushing into the cities, explosive growth. What do you do with the density and the problems they bring? How do you house them? The World Bank has a nice term, the informality, the slums that grow. But it's really finding these people housing, jobs, there will be pollution. How do you distribute water, air pollution? All these are megacity problems. And they are mega risks and mega mess, I would say. Super cities do better. And I think if this conference were held in China, we will be discussing Jinjinji, which is what was mentioned, Beijing, Tianjin, and Hebei. But the Pearl River Delta has another very good crop of cities. And they work. It's 9 cities plus Hong Kong and Macau, 11 altogether. Now, some cities work, some cities don't. Super cities are those that do work, and they are known as influential cities. And McKinsey recently came up with superstar cities. Superstar cities are those that are globally integrated. They are on the top of the list of financial centers. They have large container ports. They are innovative. And they tend to be national or regional capitals. And there are 50 of them. 5 are in Southeast Asia. Bangkok, Kuala Lumpur, in Jakarta, Manila, and Singapore. 50 all around, 11 in the United States. So all these are super cities, and income is supposed to be high. There is real estate value, but great inequality as well. So what are the cities that are doing well? I would say Tokyo is doing very well as a megacity. I would say New York is not bad. Singapore is not a megacity, but Jakarta is trying, and we can talk about that.
How about Seoul? When you look at Seoul, if you think of Japan and South Korea that have been
Seoul just won the World City Prize.
Right.
That Singapore awarded, and New York was awarded that prize. So Seoul has done quite a good job, actually.
Mike, part of what Heng Chee referenced was McKinsey's Super Cities report, and one of their metrics is the value added to the GDP of the economy, and that's where some of the cities like Singapore are very high performers despite not having a very large population. As Mastercard, as a payments company, you're actually part of the infrastructure that translates the data of the city, the microeconomic activity of the city, into that overall economic impact. Can you shed some light, actually, and even just explain to people just how important Mastercard has been in transportation in particular? It's one of the first sectors that you've moved into.
Well, thank you. I mean, first of all, why are we here talking about this? Is because, as your map showed, we're going to have 70% of the world's population, 80% of global GDP in cities. Cities is where a lot of the action is going to take place. Not that we could ignore the rural areas. And increasingly, it's going to be cities and the private sector that take on these challenges. I'd sort of put it in three buckets. One would be efficiency, growth, and inclusion. And if there's one overall theme of this whole forum, it's been the importance of inclusive growth. From efficiency, it's all about how do you help cities deliver services to their population better, more effectively, creating a better quality of life. And as you mentioned, we've been working for some time now in the transit sector. In London, for example, if you travel in London recently, you can buy an Oyster card, but you don't need to buy an Oyster card. You can just walk through and wave your Mastercard or other cards. That process of going to contactless transit, just as one example, save the City of London £100 million a year that they can put into housing or education or healthcare or a number of any other things. And now we've got that going, working with about 120 cities around the world. When it comes to growth, I think the question is, can we use our data as a payments company that has a lot of insights, anonymized, aggregated insights? It's privacy by design. We don't collect personal information. We don't know your name or what it is you buy, but we know where money is spent, when it's spent, how much is spent. Can we give that to cities in a way that helps them understand where to put the incremental investment dollar? Put a retail place here, extend your transit system there, have maximum impact on the economy given the data insights that we can provide them? Or can we help them manage their congestion? You know, talked about how crowded the cities are. You know, we've done a project with Chicago where giving them data has allowed commuters to change their routes, take a coupon for a latte at Starbucks and delay their commute by 15 minutes and have a much more pleasant experience and avoid a lot of the congestion accordingly. And then on inclusion, it's really about both inclusion as individuals and inclusion of micro and small businesses. When it comes to individuals, you can't imagine having inclusion without first tackling the issue of identification. We've got over 1 billion people around the world who still have no formal identification. How do we help provide them that kind of identification as a pathway into the financial system and towards financial security? And then on the small and medium-sized enterprises and the micro merchants, whether it's something in Nairobi we're doing with Unilever to digitalize the relationship between micro merchants and Unilever so they can get credit, or the kind of work we're doing with small businesses all around the world, including here in Singapore, through what we call Mastercard Track, to get them into global supply chains in a much more efficient way. So there's a big role, I think, for the private sector to play in helping cities deal with the challenges of becoming mega cities, and at a time when perhaps national governments aren't as on the front foot of getting solutions out there, having the private sector work with cities may be the best way forward.
And would Nairobi be the developing world mega city where you've done the most work?
We've done a lot of work in Nairobi. We have a financial inclusion laboratory there that does takes our technology and our products and tries to think about how to reposition them for humanitarian and development purposes, whether it's to help refugees get access to foreign assistance or help farmers plug into the global market. So there's a lot that can be done in developing countries, but this is a developed country issue too. We talk about gig workers in the United States who are trying to figure out how to manage very uneven incomes, how to create financial security in an environment where you don't have access to benefits from your employer, and where your income can be very choppy. How do you save, and how do you move from financial inclusion, financial access, to actually having financial health and financial security?
Nadim, actually, Heng Chee alluded to Jakarta as a city that's trying to shift from being a mega city into a super city, and one of the industries that's benefited the most from what Mike has been pointing out around the payments innovations and harnessing data is, of course, ride sharing. Gojek is the hottest startup in Southeast Asia, Indonesia's first unicorn. So can you tell us a bit about how in the past couple of years, how you've played such a pivotal role in this transition that Jakarta really needs to make? Sure.
So Jakarta is in many ways a perfect chaos because we've got a population in Indonesia of approaching 300 million and very few economic centers. Jakarta, you could say, is arguably the only one that has a huge amount of economic commercial activity. The others are growing, but not as fast. So you've got massive migration into it. and you've got massive, it's almost like a heartbeat, you know? There's Greater Jakarta, which has well over 20 million people. And during the day, most of the 10 million outside of metro area are coming into the city every day to work. So you've got a perfect density problem, you've got a perfect congestion problem, and as a result, you've got a perfect pollution problem, right? So, so Gojek is kind of the world's first kind of super app that attacks all various inefficiencies in getting stuff around, transactions around, and things around. So we move people, we move food, we facilitate transactions like payments, and we move
Sorry to
things.
interrupt. Can you use the handheld mic? There's
Sure,
something wrong with the mic. Yeah. There you go.
So, you know, we're the largest employer or indirect employer in the country with about, 1 million drivers, and we serve about 300,000 small businesses and serve their food. So, in terms of what we do is the app allows users to hack the constraints of megacities, essentially, right? So what it means is that instead of, so we're substituting a few activities that are actually increasing friction in a megacity. Number one is owning your own vehicle. The vast majority of people who use our ride-hailing service own their own vehicle. For food delivery, we're actually removing the need to go to a mall or removing the need to spend extra time cooking your meal, okay? So a lot of malls have disbenefited, actually, as a result of GoFood, because now families are getting together and hosting friends in houses.
You're nothing if not a disruptor. Yeah.
Yes. And thirdly, what we are replacing with our payment platform is cash, right? And exactly to the point that you were making before, actually, as you digitize these movements of humans and goods and tracking transactions, you create a new layer of visibility around how the city actually operates. And this is the fundamental problem with actually city planning and city governance in general. They honestly do not have even enough data with which to ascertain what are the actual problems that matter to people, how acute are they, and what are the root causes. Before solutioning, that is the base minimum. You need to first find out and quantify what exactly are the frictions that are faced by people. And so I think the first and fundamental problem is there's a lot of domain expertise being thrown around how best practice. But at the end of the day, the only way to actually create incremental and positive sustainable improvement is by hyper-experimentation. There's no other way around it. You need to have 1 million experiments running at the same time across multiple megacities for you to actually crack what is workable in each of them. And so I believe technology plays a massive role, together with government, to actually create that megacity optima of, okay, here's the hierarchy of things to attack. We have problems here, here's how big they are, and here are the root causes. Now let's figure out the solution together.
And your interface with the policy community in Jakarta, the mayor's office, even the federal government, how receptive are they to your identifying and providing solutions to these bottlenecks?
Very, very receptive. It wasn't always the case, right? Initially, it seemed, because we transport more people than the public transport system in Jakarta, we were seen in some ways competitive, but that has changed over the years. And now what we have, we're also Google's largest investment in Southeast Asia. So together with Google and us, the amount of data that we can provide to transportation, public transport services, how to plan a transportation model that actually works, that is multimodal, including ride-hailing, is a critical part of public transportation. People don't want to say that, but ride-hailing is public transportation, right? It's got every part of the elements of public transportation. So we're teaching the National Rail Organization on what is Scrum and Agile methodology. We're working with the MRT system, the new subway that's happening now, to try to figure out what is the optimal flow and whether they got their pricing and station locations right, and where should they add next location. We're working with Busway with a variety of innovations. We used to do an app to describe when the busways are coming. But the whole aim is then to take all of these stakeholders, get together, and finally create a digitized, machine learning based transportation model that can be used to bridge the digital and the offline world across multimodal. Because it doesn't take one, it takes at least 5 different modes of transportation in a mega city for you to cover the entire gamut, right? Just like a human organ, you need multiple channels of delivery to provide nutrients for a city.
Amazing.
And I think, unfortunately, those are way too many variables. Once you include human psychology, those variables are way too complex for basic human algorithms to do it. You need machine learning in order to optimize for the entire city.
And our session is taking place, of course, on the back of the previous one about AI superpowers and the role of China. But I hope people, if you hadn't heard of Gojek before, appreciate what a holistic company it is and what a broad set of issues you're tackling through your advances in technology. It's just incredible. Oscar, when we think about, and Nadeem mentioned Google being, the largest investment that they have is in Gojek. I think of Google and United Airlines. In the absence of the U.S. joining TPP, you're 2 agents of trans-Pacific connectivity from the United States over to this part of the world, and you have, as a leader of the company, really put Asia in the center of your focus. So when you think about Asia and super cities and connectivity, tell us a little bit about the new routes that you're planning and how you view your role in maintaining this trans-Pacific bonds.
So not to sound, excuse me, as a commercial, but first and foremost, I have to completely agree. If we had, and my list of cities, I think Jakarta just jumped up about 10 spots because it's a long list.
Yeah.
It is so important for folks in country to understand those basic premises, right? From the standpoint of urban planners and city and policy officials, a lot of times don't get the information and the facts. The concept of an app that de-stresses the traveler, it's an amazing new concept. Transportation, of course, right? However we get back and forth. And then you said something which was great, hyper-experimentation. So from our perspective, we've been flying to Asia for longer than anyone. We've been here decades. So we knew China before China was cool, as they used to say. We're the first ones to go into secondary and tertiary cities, hyper-experimentation. They didn't all work. We go in, we pull out, and we regroup based upon a lot of the factors that you sort of outlined. We outpace our American competitors flying into the Far East by 20%. And so all those combinations come into play. And so when we think about where we're headed, where we're going next, what are the great cities that we do, it's a constant analytical prowess. One of my visits, I'll be traveling to various different cities, and if you know where I'm traveling, you know where our next places are potentially, because we have partners. We have Singapore Air here, we have ANA in Japan, we have Korean Air in Korea, and we know where they connect. And so between their information, our understanding where the business flows are going and from what portals in the US, we're kind of experts on super cities because the US, however you think of the US, did sort of create the concept for a long period of time. Our portals are, whether it's on the East Coast or the West Coast, those are the portals to the Far East. San Francisco, predominantly LA and others to a lesser degree, are the places to go. And what they constitute is a central place with good urban planning, with good transportation, needs to improve, but that's how we look at the whole concept. So we have a list of probably 10, 15 countries around the world that we do that. And it evolves, and the advice I'd give to everyone, it's not immediate. You come and visit us and you tell us all the great things about your city. We need proof, not promise. Right. And so Tel Aviv is a good example to provide. In 2004 is when we started the first New York to Tel Aviv flight. We now fly 5 or 6 times a day there. And the evolution of what Tel Aviv has done across their entire spectrum, the tech space, I mean, if you're a tech entrepreneur and you want to get from San Francisco to Tel Aviv or Chengdu, you're not flying anybody else except us, because we're the only ones that go there. And we do not make those decisions lightly. We will press you hard about the things you're saying and ask for proof. So it is a bit of an evolution. And ironically, it should be, this is a biased statement, it should be what we do as an airline to connect the world to you. You can't be a super city without it. And not just my airline. And in addition, it shouldn't be your last thought. It should be one of your first thoughts. And airports are critically competitive. What you have and what you've built here in Singapore, beautiful. It makes a difference to travelers where they connect. It really does. And urban planners don't often get that piece. Yes.
You mentioned making early bets on emerging Chinese cities, and you mentioned Chengdu as well as an example that's come up very, very quickly, is now one of China's mega city cluster hubs. what about the rest of Asia? Give us your top 3, and now Jakarta has just jumped up 10 places.
As I said before, we're visiting and exploring everything, but I do have competitors, and so we keep those things very quiet until we're ready.
But we've clearly learned that it's a data-driven approach for sure.
And it's a human-driven too. It's important to have partnerships that are going to last.
Please, Heng Chee.
Yes, I was going to add, the infrastructure is very important. If you look at China's cities, China has done actually quite well with the massive urbanization and problems. They still have to sort out. But what they've done right is they begin by building the right infrastructure, roads, rails, tunnels, linkages, and also telecommunications, water supply, grids. So that helps. But I think it is also the fact that they have an ecological awareness, and they use smart technology. Smart technology is just used in China all over now. You have heard of Alipay, Future Hospital. It streamlines people going to a hospital, the patient's experience. You reserve a place, you register, the insurance claim is made, payment is made. So there you are. You save patient visits with telemedicine, Ali Health, and the pharmacies deliver medicine to you. So you see, building the infrastructure, having the smart technology in many ways, building platforms to gather data, and then I think China, Xi Jinping's last 19th Party speech, Congress speech, was emphasis on building the ecological civilization.
China has been an outlier in the supply-led growth model that's kind of anathema in orthodox economic thinking, but it clearly works. So, building ahead, creating demand. If you build it, they will come. It has been happening, but we haven't seen it happen as much elsewhere, where cities, authorities are just catching up to demand. And you have to grapple with this all the time when you're trying to work in these places. But again, they're not digitized, inadequate infrastructure, mostly informal economies. Give us your thoughts on working in those environments. And then Oscar also, please.
I think this discussion underscores a very important emerging issue, which is the emerging gap between the data access and capabilities of the private sector, which is astounding, and the same access that public officials or the nonprofit sector, the social sector have. And that's something I think we in the private sector need to be very attentive to, is how to figure out how to bridge that gap, how to create greater capabilities so the urban planners have access to the necessary information and to the tools in order to use that information to make intelligent and informed decisions. And I think this is very important overall. I see Minister Tharman here. This is digitizing the economy in Jakarta or elsewhere is also about broadening the base, bringing into the light the informal economy, making it more and more formal. Part of financial inclusion is to help individuals and companies achieve financial security, but it's also about creating a stable economy with greater capability for governments to manage their economic policy and mobilize domestic resources. And I think that's a key part of the potential there. And that's important for our companies. We talk about in Mastercard about doing well by doing good, and we say that in part because it is completely in our interest that we invest in helping governments develop their data capabilities, doing financial inclusion, because it creates a stronger economy down the world, the market that will ultimately benefit us and everybody else as well. And so I think companies having that view that you've got to focus on obviously delivering superior shareholder returns, but you also have to see yourself as having impact on the social and economic environment in which you operate. And in doing that, having a positive impact, you are creating the environment in which you will succeed. And that redounds to your benefit as well.
There's a linkage between what you're saying and what Oscar is involved in because of the tourism angle and hospitality, which is a critical pillar of the services economy. And one of the big concerns about economies in the region is, of course, the fear of labor automation and premature deindustrialization, right? But it turns out, actually, that most of the economies in the region already have better than 50% of their GDP based around services. And by focusing on citizens, financial inclusion, entrepreneurs, you accelerate that transition. But the hospitality industry and tourism is a big part of that. And I think this is one of the areas where Mastercard's starting to get into now that you've done so much in transport. Is that right?
Yeah, no, obviously we see a lot of transactions of people traveling around the world. We can help cities or states or countries manage their tourism efforts, the tourism campaigns. They want to see more. We can say tourists from this region spend more than tourists from that region. If you're going to spend the incremental dollar on marketing, you should be spending it here versus there, or here's how they respond. And again, it's how to use data to help the public sector and our partners, to partner with them to help solve a problem for them.
And this is the kind of data that's very useful for you as well as you're aggregating to decide what your next destinations are going to be.
Of course it is, right? We overanalyze things to everything. But just to underscore a couple points, and I think the point with regards to the infrastructure and ecosystem and what things like people in China are doing, it's frankly very simple to build in a place that doesn't have the restrictions. We take years to get permits in America. Right. So greenfield is a wonderful thing with all the great technology. The advice I'd give, and I think back to Jakarta's sort of story, how do you figure out what China can do, and how do you do it through digital aspects of it? And so the app that you talked about, I think is a great word thing. And the only other thing I would say, when the conversation around tourism, tourism is a wonderful thing, and 70 to 80% of our revenue on any given one of our flights are leisure travelers, but they travel very infrequently. United Airlines is predominantly, because of the places we operate, a business airline. So you have to create a business demand of really large proportions in order to make a super city truly that. It's not just about tourism. As much as we'd like it to be, there's many other options for flying for tourists that are low cost in nature.
Nadeem, Oscar hasn't told us what new cities he's going to go to for obvious reasons. What about you? Because now Vietnam has been the next place where you're going head-to-head with your competitors. In terms of, for everyone in the audience who wants to know, what's the next sort of set of Asian super cities that they need to be exploring as a business destination? You've already examined that, so tell us where's next for you guys.
So next would be, Vietnam's already there, and then next would be Singapore and Thailand, quite close together. So hopefully soon here you'll have another option, and of course. Philippines is also on the horizon. That would be, that would make up the vast majority of Southeast Asia's middle class and kind of high growth economies. And so again, the objective is to create one kind of super app where all the transactions of the middle class can flow throughout, and therefore design better optimas, not just for the private sector, but also for the public sector. What
about the internal geography? Because when you say Vietnam, do you mean just Ho Chi Minh City and Hanoi? And when you say Thailand, you mean Bangkok? Or is immediate nationwide rollout?
Yeah. So we basically go into the areas that have the more acute infrastructure and demographic issues, which by default means the cities, the biggest cities in those. Because to be honest, if you go to like a tier 3 city in Indonesia, I mean, traffic is not really a problem, right? There's other problems there like financial inclusion, et cetera, that's where our payments strategy and financial services addresses. But initially, we first have to get that critical mass just to solve the day-to-day pains of individuals. And I think on the economic front, I think it's also important to know, I mean, we're the largest food delivery business in Southeast Asia right now, and that continues to be one of our core tenets. And the thing is that 80% of those transactions are coming from very, very small businesses. And so in Southeast Asia, mega cities, and this is a little bit counterintuitive to people who are used to looking at Western economies and developing, in Southeast Asia, for the large part of the developing economies, in mega cities, the largest commercial activities are actually done in the informal economy or the semi-informal economy. And these are mom and pop restaurants, et cetera, which 80% of our food delivery transactions are not chains. Right? So how do we leverage that proliferation of SMB, of small businesses? Because it represents the largest commercial value of both the spend of the middle to lower class. Everyone spends most of their money on food, by the way.
Absolutely.
That's everyone in the world.
And,
lower class, middle class, you'll spend
food,
the largest
healthcare,
proportion.
education is the basket,
But healthcare and education does not compare to food.
Oh,
like
it's that much more.
It's like way more. Okay, people spend away. So getting that right and getting that competitive and encouraging micro entrepreneurship through that platform is one of our key goals across Southeast Asia. And as you'll see in Vietnam, maybe even Singapore, that the growth of small businesses will have a direct impact on the health of megacities.
But for those who are impressed with the scale and pace of GDP growth in Southeast Asia, remember that up to 40 to 50% of the GDP is not even accounted for because it is estimated to be that high in the informal sector. So every single day you are bringing more formal business activities, and that's going to be a driver of keeping those GDP growth rates high. Heng, Chee, Oscar mentioned Changi Airport, beloved around the world, #1 ranked. When people come to Singapore, they admire not just the airport, but the the far-sighted urban planning, the balance of the urban and the green, the public housing system. But Singapore has less than 6 million people. So what are the lessons that are adaptable to the mega cities that have 10 times that population?
You know, what makes Singapore successful, Parag, is really the way we work. And I would say how we work as a system can be applied elsewhere. First, leaders must have a vision. Then you have to show leadership. But the implementation is extremely important. So you have to build the bureaucracy, get the right laws, get the right regulations, getting that out. And you have to have buy-in from the people. And I think Singapore does that very well. You heard my Prime Minister last night. So it's that exercise, and Singapore works in this way. We have the whole of government approach. When you want to plan a city, you want to plan anything, you bring every agency in. For instance, we have the public housing estates. You can have a mall there. When it's tendered out, the developer has to contact several agencies because it's not just the mall. The developer has to build underground a bus interchange to save land. People board the bus there. MRT will bring them here. They go home by a bus, but it's underground. Then you put in police station. You bring in the Ministry of Home Affairs. You bring in a community center. You bring in the People's Association, another agency. And you want to bring in a commercial crash. You bring in another agency. So this forces a multi-agency cooperation so things work. And of course, we use a lot of smart technology.
It's so important. You've mentioned public-private partnerships is
Right.
Sort of now a term that's almost become a cliche, but it's something that has to be embedded in the practice in the government. So you work so much with governments, Mike, federal as well as municipal. Where are you seeing that message sinking in, or the habit, if you will, as Heng Chee has described it?
I think it's a bit of an evolution because from my time in government, when people talked about public-private partnerships, they usually meant they wanted the private sector to write a check.
Right.
And that was the extent of the partnership. And I think what's...
Not the way still?
No, exactly. I think what's important, and now that I'm on the private sector side again, I find it sometimes surprising just how much distance and suspicion there is by the government or by nonprofit organizations about working with the private sector. We're never going to solve the world's problems through official finance and even philanthropy. It's only going to make progress on the goals that we all have if we're aligning the commercial interests of the private sector with social impact. And that means being able to work with the private sector in a true partnership and having the private sector be very transparent and understand that the public sector has interests that have to be respected and have to be taken into account. But at the end of the day, we need to be able to show that we can do the commercially sustainable social impact.
Absolutely.
If we're going to have an impact on some of the global challenges. And that means changing the PPP model to really one where it's not just writing a check, it's looking at our technology, our products, our business models, and aligning our interests with having that broader objective.
I call it co-governance, and it seems to me, Nadim, you really suddenly become not just a startup founder, you're a co-governor of Indonesia and the future sort of political economy of the country. We have less than a minute left. You both wanted to make some short comments, then we'll wrap up.
So I actually just wanted to comment on the
Go
Changi
ahead.
question that you have. So many people ask me, like, how do you actually make a really good mobile app? And very often I respond, just go to Changi Airport. So for me, Changi is a real-world application that is designed around human-centered design, and it is masterful at it. And I think that kind of human-centered design is a fundamental skill set that is missing in a lot of governing bodies that needs to be injected in like abundant amounts of dose. Just go out there and see how people interact with their city and their environment. And then you can create little nudges towards it. So building an app and a fantastic airport requires very similar skill sets on how to nudge and create human-centered design. So I just want to note, and Changi is my favorite airport in the world, by the way. I'm there all the time.
Oscars too. Final word?
Just the conversation about GDP and how, of course, how that important it is, but increasingly, certainly United, that social factor is a big. Happy people are a great source of customers for us. So it's a balance in that regard. So that's also helpful.
Well, everyone, our time is up. I'd love to thank the panel for educating us, guiding us into the future where it's not just about cities, but hopefully about super cities. Thank you, everyone.